Hello, today I'm going to be making Prussian blue using potassium ferrocyanide and ferric chloride. Now these are going to react in an aqueous solution to form ferric ferrocyanide, which is also known as Prussian blue. This is a deep blue pigment that is often used in painting, but also has an interesting use in treating radiation poisoning. I'm starting off by weighing out 1 gram of each of these compounds. I'm not really sure how this is going to go out. I've read online that I need a very concentrated solution of these, but I kind of have a gut feeling that I can just throw 1 gram into a solution and still get a good reaction. Handling the ferric chloride was very interesting. It sort of appears to melt at the touch, which is really something I didn't expect when I first touched it. Now that I had my samples prepared, I needed to actually put them into solution. For that, I needed to use distilled water. If I didn't use distilled water and use something like tap water, there'd be risk of the ions in the tap water reacting with the ions that I'm trying to dissolve. I very roughly measured out 30 milliliters of water for the potassium ferrocyanide and 40 milliliters of water for the ferric chloride. Again, it really didn't matter how much water I used for these. This lab really is not intended to be for accuracy. It is 100% just for me to make a really pretty blue compound. Now, for my stir rod of choice, I went with chopsticks, mainly because I didn't have anything else in my house that was chemically inert. And whenever I was shopping for these chemicals, I had forgotten to put the stir rod into my shopping cart. Now, both of these chemicals are actually pretty soluble. I was really surprised. I had honestly expected both of them to be roughly insoluble, but it did take some time to get both of them dissolved, especially the ferric chloride, because it came in such big chunks. It took me a while to break it down, but after a pretty good amount of stirring, I was able to get both of them into solution. Something interesting I had wanted to note was even at this point, I wasn't sure how reactive this reaction was going to be. I had read online that I needed a very concentrated solution, as I'd mentioned previously, but I wasn't really sure what to expect until I had stirred both of these together and wiped off the stir rods, I mean chopsticks, on the same tissue paper, and it actually reacted on the tissue. So up until this point, I wasn't sure what was going to happen, but once I saw that reaction, I knew that my results would hopefully be good. As you can see, my hopes ended up coming true. As soon as the solution of potassium ferrocyanide hit the ferric chloride solution, it immediately turned a deep blue. Now, like I previously said, this product is completely insoluble, and you can kind of see whenever I swirl the beaker around that there is sort of the blue sticking to the side of the beaker, and that is just the insoluble product sticking to the side of the beaker. Now, once I added the rest of the potassium ferrocyanide, you can't really tell, but it does actually finish reacting, and there is a lot more insoluble product now in the solution. Maybe it's a little more obvious whenever I go to stir with my chopsticks, it just completely stains the wood. The next step of the process was to separate the Prussian blue from the solution. Now, I could have done this through filtering or through heating. I chose to do it through filtering because I was nervous about the risks associated with heating. Since this is a ferrocyanide molecule, there is actually a risk of heating it and breaking it down to actual cyanide. Now, I don't really know what temperature this occurs at. I couldn't find a clear temperature at which Prussian blue actually breaks down at. So I just kind of decided to go with the safest route and just go with a simple filtration. I ended up using a coffee filter for this process, mainly because the filters I had bought online were actually better suited for finer filtrations of smaller particulates. The coffee filter worked really well for grabbing just the big chunks of Prussian blue, which was really just what I was going for. I forgot to record the clip of me actually scraping the semi-wet Prussian blue out of the coffee filter, but I do have this clip of the semi-dried Prussian blue. And just as an example of how strong this is as a pigment, this is what my knife looked like after just a little bit of playing with the Prussian blue. I set the Prussian blue aside for longer to dry, and when I came back to it, I felt like it was dry enough to try to crush up. I wanted to crush it up into smaller pieces because a lot of the lab videos and images I've seen have shown that whenever you crush it into smaller pieces, the color seems to pop a little bit more. So I started trying to crush it up in a little plastic baggie, and I kind of noticed that it was still pretty wet on the inside. It was almost mushy even to just my fingers. So after a little bit of trying to break it up into smaller pieces, I decided to put it back on a piece of filter paper to dry even longer. This is what the more dried out Prussian blue ended up looking like. I feel like you can kind of tell that it has lost a little bit of its size, but it was now at a dry enough amount that I felt like I could smash it into smaller pieces and actually get a fine particle from it. I again just put the compound into a plastic bag and smacked it with the end of my knife to try to break it down into smaller pieces. It would have been much better to use a mortar and pestle, but I didn't really feel like buying a mortar and pestle, especially because the blue pigment was probably just going to stain it. This is what my final Prussian blue ended up looking like. It's kind of dark and it's very hard to tell on this camera, but it definitely does have a blue hue to it. And it was a really fun project to make. I really enjoyed putting my effort through to make this. I think it's a really pretty color whenever you actually put it to use. I'm probably just going to put it in a plastic baggie and just enjoy the fact that I actually made this. I hope you enjoyed watching and have a nice day.